the SeeAudio X Crinacle Midnight. Let's talk about it. This product is on loan from another YouTuber, Mark from SuperReviews. I wanted to thank him for this loan. This is a $200 discontinued IEM, and it's an interesting configuration. It's a single dynamic driver, 2BA, $200, and it's an interesting set. Let's start by looking at the packaging and the build quality of this IEM. The shell is sort of peculiar with this IEM. You'll notice that there's kind of a slant to the left. It's a little bit higher, it doesn't come straight in, so its fit is a little bit strange for some people. You notice there's kind of that slant right there you can see. And it's overall, you know, it's one of those IEM shells that's very okay fitting, but not great. You'll notice it does have a vent right here, and it is a flat 2-pin cable connector. Its faceplate is objectively kind of nice. I like it. It's an overall just kind of one of those shells that's okay, but it's fairly small, and I don't think size will be the problem, but possibly the angle of the nozzle or possibly like the width of it might be a little bit of an issue for people. But it's overall a fine IEM shell, but just not my favorite. Now, the cable of this, now note this is an older IEM, but the cable is not very exciting. The chin slider is kind of weird. It doesn't stay fit very well. Like, it doesn't stay in place. It's really, really loose, like loosey-goosey. The cable itself is a 2-wire cable. It's kind of blarg. It feels kind of like an afterthought on kind of an expensive product. It's not too exciting, and I'm overly not impressed with the cable at all. You know, this is the packaging we have here, the SeeAudio Yume like hockey puck, which is about a $3 AliExpress item with their logo on it, their crappy cable, a basic set of tips. So it's not that exciting of a packaging experience. You know, I want to review this IEM because I want to try to get a handle of what other IEMs and collabs are out there. It's interesting to me. I know that Crinacle has discontinued this IEM, and there's a new IEM that's coming out that's going to be at this price point sometime in the next year. It's been teased on Crinacle's YouTube channel. So this IEM itself is interesting because of a few things. One, it has an almost perfect FR for me, but there's a few problems, and it doesn't quite sound exactly what I want from an IEM. It's interesting to me when you have a good FR, but the sound of it and the tonality of it isn't always exactly what we want. This is kind of how I feel about this IEM. Let's go ahead and start by looking at some graphs. Now, this is how the Yume Midnight measured on my graph. You'll notice it's really close to my target, like closer than a lot of IEMs that I like better. And it's interesting to me why this is the case. I think sometimes graphs mean a lot, but sometimes they don't. And I think sometimes there can be issues with drivers, issues with FR that's beyond the graph, you know, and that's kind of something to kind of note. And I want to be, you know, cautious of that. Like, be careful sometimes that, you know, frequency response does mean a lot, but it doesn't always mean everything. It has a nice tonality to this IEM, and it does a lot of things well. But let's get into a few other things about this. The big thing I like, it does have a nice bass shelf. Its mids are pretty good, but the air and details of this IEM feel a little bit off and feel a little bit weird. We'll go into that here in the conclusion, but that's kind of where I wanted to start with. The first one I always want to talk about, I always try to talk about other IEMs from the same brand. And since this is a collab, it's kind of different, but we're going to go ahead and look at this bass shelf. You'll notice there's a huge bass shelf right here versus the Bravery, and the Bravery has a ton of treble. I found the Bravery to be kind of a treble head IEM. I've owned and tried to have a few other SeeAudio products like the Yume 2 before this, and I thought those to be a little bit better. But you know, for now, that's kind of all we have graph-wise to look at, and I think the Midnight's better than the Bravery. I wasn't really impressed with the Bravery. I just thought it too treble focused. The next one. Now we're talking about ones at that price point. I really like the Performer 5. I mean, the Performer 5 has a little bit of energy here. The Yume Night has a little bit better bass, but I think the overall tonality of the Performer 5, it just feels like glass. It feels a little bit more neutral and balanced. Another one to look at is SeeAudio's Chopin. I really like this IM. It has a little bit more treble. It comes across a little bit more bright, has nice kind of fun punchy bass. It does kind of have a weird, unique shell, but I think it's kind of a better, safer pick for a lot of people than the Midnight. Another one to look at is the Nova. I like the Nova better. I think the Nova is the one that I don't talk about. You'll notice their bass shelves are pretty similar. You'll notice a little bit of a tuck on the Nova. And where on the Yume Midnight, you have a little bit more subdued treble. On the Nova, you have a little bit more elevated treble, a little bit less of that 8K peak. I think the Nova is a little bit safer, even though it's not super exciting and engaging like the Chopin. The Chopin might be the better way to go. But the Nova being at 150, I think is a very fine set, all things considering. Another one to look at for Crinacle, I honestly think the Kiwi Ears Crinacle Singolo is a really nice IEM. You'll notice the less 8K peak, nice bass shelf, overall nice little solid set. I guess my only problem with the Singolo was the fit, and it's overall doesn't have the best air and extension, but I can kind of get over that if everything else is kind of where I want it. So I think the Singolo is something that you may want to consider if you're looking for that bassy shelf, because not everything that Crinacle does has the exact same tonality, and has the exact same FR, and that's something to note. Another one to think about, it's a little bit more money, but the new Dusk I am a huge fan of, even in its stock cable form. I don't think it's perfect, but it does certain genres of music well. It's not that bad. It has a nice fit. The drivers and the sound quality of it are good, and it takes EQ like a champ. It also has that nice cable that you can easily EQ with the cable as well. And so it gives you kind of a flat, clean slate. And there's something to be said about the Crinacle Dusk. It does a lot of things really, really well, and it's really nice and smooth and even treble. All right, so the Jazir 61T is another IEM. These two both have a very similar FR. I really like the Jazir 61T. I feel like it had just enough treble and did some things a little bit better. I mean, maybe it's just a little bit less 8K. Maybe just the treble and the stuff off the graph is a little bit better. Maybe it was that the fit of that IEM was better. There's a lot of different factors to consider, but I think if you're going after this tonality, rather than chase down something that's used and maybe not as good, I think the Jazir 61T might be a good way to go if you're after that tonality, or maybe even stretch the money and go for the Dyna Quattro, which I think is a better set than both of these. And that could be another way to consider. If you don't want to spend that kind of money and you're after a really nice bass shelf IEM, I think the Awful Explorer is a really solid set. It has really good air extension, nice detail, a little bit lacking in the treble presentation, but it's also not bad. It does a lot of things well. It's just a little bit subdued rather than kind of overall bad. And I really am impressed with that set. The SeeAudio Yume Midnight, one of those IEMs that has pretty good tuning, really good tuning, but its technicalities and its detail aren't really there. Its upper air isn't very good, but its mids are pretty nice. Its bass is pretty nice, but the tactility of that bass isn't as good as the level would meet. It doesn't image very well. Its soundstage feels very dead neutral where it's at, and it doesn't have the best resolution. And so for me, it's just, it's kind of a middling set, a 7.5, no star recommendation, and just kind of okay. As far as this IEM goes, I think it's a solid IEM. I think it's for collectors at this point. I think people might be better off getting a cheaper IEM or getting another one, like maybe the Yume 2, maybe get the Singolo. You can get something from the brand or the collaborator for cheaper, and that's possibly a better IEM, at least what I think. I think the problem with this one has that its soundstage is middling. It has poor treble. Its detail separation is extremely poor. The bass isn't very tactile or as quick as somebody might want to think, and its tonality overall isn't terrible, but it's not what you would expect. I feel like there's just more to be expected from this. There's some weird timbre and some BA timbre with this. And I think for this price, you might be able to get something like, you know, maybe a little bit more and get a used variations or an Oracle, or, you know, just save your money to get something a little bit newer and you might be better off. Again, there's just not a lot of sparkle, air, and detail in this IEM, and it doesn't get a recommendation unless you're a collector. Again, I think that's just my opinion, that even if you're a fan of the brand or the collaborator, or, you know, store owner, or whatever you want to call it, Crinacle at this point, I think there's a lot better options at this point. You're still here. It's over. Go home. Go watch another IEM video. It's done. That's the entire video. What more do you want?